Hello everybody, and welcome back in joining us for the fourth and final installment as we follow Captain Francisco Dqueller, a young Spanish officer who became shipwrecked and hunted through the northwest region of late 16th century Ireland. This was because of his involvement in the Spanish Armada of 1588, an attempted military landing by Prince Philip II of Spain into England in order to overthrow the Protestant Queen Elizabeth I, which in turn would help safeguard the Spanish interests in the New World.
But due to a lethal combination of bad weather and bad luck, the ships from the Armada were unable to land in England and were forced to travel up over the north of Scotland, then down south by the west coast of Ireland. As they were in the process of doing this, fresh storm fronts brewed up, which broke many of the ships free from the hemp ropes they used on their anchors, as even on the largest vessels, chains had not yet been adopted, causing many of these ships to be driven ashore and destroyed.
This is how, like so many other Spanish soldiers and sailors, Dqueller became lost in unfamiliar settings, struggling to survive and seeking a way back home. In previous episodes, we followed Dqueller as he came ashore at Streedagh Strand to find that most of the locals were delighted to acquire whatever bounty they could, freshly washed up by the shore, with some even willing to go as far as using force to take what they wanted from those survivors freshly spat up by the storm.
Then, with the help of some more friendly locals, got to the stronghold of the O'Rourke's at Newtown, where they're informed that the O'Rourke's were gone, but told of a Spanish ship back near Streedagh helping Spanish survivors, although he was too slow due to his injuries, so was left behind and missed this ship. After this, a priest helped him to Cuellar Castle near the village of Kinloch, where Dqueller and fellow castaways had to defend it from a brief siege by the English. With the castle successfully defended, the Lord of Cuellar tried to get the Spanish to stay.
This is where our last episode ended, with Dqueller and 4 other Spanish, fearing that they would never be allowed to leave, hopping the castle walls and swimming ashore in the early hours just 2 days after Christmas Day.
Now in the height of winter, having fled Cuellar for fear of the Lord Maclancy, Dqueller and his company made their way to Dunluce Castle on the Antrim coast, taking them 20 days to make the journey. Dqueller does not describe these days nor the route that they took, but does write that by travelling by the mountains and desolate places, they made it as far as Dunluce, which overlooks the famous geological site, the Giant's Causeway. It was here Dqueller talks about how they entered the huts of some of the locals to be told of the great wrecks that had happened just on the coast beside the Giant's Causeway, about how no one had survived, and of the great wealth that the locals had collected from the beach, which they showed to the Spanish with great delight, but which obviously made the Spanish very unhappy. Besides the loss of life and the plundering, this also demonstrated to them just how lost and far from home they really were.
The Goronia was a ship that smashed here, at the place that still bears the name Spaniard's Rock, on the western head of Port España, near the Giant's Causeway. Don Alonso de Livia was the man in charge of this vessel. When they first set sail from Lisbon, de Livia was a man of great reputation and commanded the Rata, a ship to which many of the youths from the most noble families had been entrusted.
The Rata ran ashore at Blacksod Bay, County Mayo, where the crew set it ablaze while a petty local chief called Richard Burke, nicknamed the Devil's Son, with his men plundered what they could, robbing and mistreating those that washed ashore. Hearing of this, Brian O'Rourke invited de Livia and his top brass to come stay with him in his castles out in Dromahair. He didn't stay there long though, and was soon embarking himself and his men on another galleon, the San Martin, and fell in with other ships that were just offshore. As they were making their way north, a fresh wind picked up and forced these ships into the harbour of Killybegs, just next to Donegal town. Here, again, they were forced to grab what valuables they could and make it ashore as their ships became wrecks. This meant that they were onshore relying on provisions from Tyrconnell before getting on the next ship, the St. Anna. This vessel ran into rocks in the Glenaveg Bay a few miles west of Inishowen Head shortly after, thus leaving only the poorly patched Goronia available.
They set sail for Scotland, but only 2 days into the journey, as they were passing the Giant's Causeway, they were smashed to bits, leaving only about 4 to make it ashore. Dqueller was not among them. With the injury to his leg, Dqueller was left behind again as the others searched for a passage to Scotland, where the king, James VI, was supposedly well dispositioned towards the Spanish. Some local women, seeing him in this state, took pity on him and brought him up to their huts by the mountains.
Here he stayed for nearly 2 months while his leg recovered. Then, when Dqueller was well enough, he walked down to the village of a local chief who Dqueller calls Prince Ocan, but which is most likely Sorley Boy MacDonnell at Dunluce Castle. Upon getting to the village, Dqueller was informed that the Lord did not wish to speak to him, as he had given his word to the Queen and was then currently accompanying her forces in another territory.
Dunluce Castle, located on the beautiful yet rocky coast of Northern Ireland in County Antrim, and is about halfway between the scenic villages of Bushmills and Portrush. The oldest recorded structure at the site is that of a 13th century Anglo-Norman manor that was built here, although it is now uncertain of the exact location of this structure.
The best guess would be that the later medieval chapel that was built in the area just southwest of Dunluce Castle was done so reusing the remains of what would have been left of the manor house as a base. This theory is due to the slightly unconventional manner in which the chapel was built, as well as the unusual name on it, as it is dedicated to St. Cuthbert, a saint mostly associated with Northumbria, which seems to suggest an Anglo-Norman origin. In saying this, the townland name having Dun in it suggests that there was some fortification here earlier than the Anglo-Norman manor. This is backed up by the excavations that took place here around 2012 to 2014, with 2 potential sections of a ditch and bank system that may have cut off this bit of land to form a promontory fort. Promontory forts are typically from the Bronze Age through to early medieval, found predominantly in Ireland and England, although there are plenty of examples to be found in mainland Europe.
They are constructed by building some type of defensive structure, such as a wall or ditch and bank system across one section that connects a piece of land to the mainland, with the other sides protected by the drop of a steep cliff. On top of this, the remains of an early medieval style rock-cut souterrain was found here under the castle.
Souterrains are chambers built into the ground, somewhat like artificial caves, built from the Iron Age in Western Europe and in Ireland used well up into the medieval period. They appear to be used for the hiding and storage of goods, as well as acting as a larder, usually being associated with settlements, such as being close or under some of our common ring forts. To go with this souterrain, some souterrain ware ceramics were unearthed. Souterrain ware is a coarse, utilitarian ceramic type that was used for a variety of tasks, such as cooking in, eating out of, or for the storage of supplies and foodstuffs.
This style of pottery was introduced to Ireland at the start of the medieval period and may have come through Scotland, with other very similar examples found there with slightly earlier dates. Now, an interesting thing about Ireland is that our Iron Age was near completely aceramic,
meaning that there is no evidence that people in Ireland between about 800 BC to around 450 AD used or made any ceramics or pottery. In Iron Age Britain and Europe, the archaeological record shows plenty of different types of ceramics for all sorts of purposes, from coarse everyday stuff to more specialised elaborate items meant for ceremonial or ritual use. From the Neolithic in Ireland over 5,000 years ago, there were ceramics, with it becoming quite a thing by the Bronze Age, with even an example of a ceramic spoon being found in a Bronze Age context down south in the country. Some cultures are even archaeologically defined by their pottery, like with the Beaker people and their decorated drinking vessels called beakers, and the small differences in them used to denote the difference between different beaker subcultures. Not to forget the ceramic urns that contained the burnt remains of their dead, which they then buried upside down in kists, a small stone slab lined box in the ground, or sometimes buried them into earlier monuments like at the court tomb at Creevy Keel near the village of Clifney, North County Sligo.
But for what reason in Ireland, for over 1,000 years, did people stop making and using ceramics? This is a hotly debated topic among archaeologists and historians to this day.
Construction of this castle was began by the MacQuinlans, a family that, 2 centuries earlier, had come from either Scotland or Wales to Ulster, perhaps part of an Anglo-Norman expansion to act as mercenaries here. They began construction in 1490, just after they came to rule in the Root, a medieval territory between the River Bann and the River Bush, and stretched southwards to Cuellar. On this crag, they built a wall to create an inner ward with 2 round angle towers, unusual for this period. But by the late 1550s, the MacQuinlans were ousted by a Scottish clan, the MacDonnells, led by Sorley Boy, also known as Sorley Boy the Fair-Haired, and who had already established their control over the glens of Antrim. It was under the MacDonnells that Dunluce achieved much of its prominence, with much of what can be seen here today coming from them.
While the 2 round towers, most likely from the MacQuinlans, the gatehouse, that has been renamed the Buttery, as well as the loggia, were built in the late 1580s when Sorley Boy and the English came to terms.
All the other buildings date from the early 17th century, when Sorley Boy's son and then grandson, who were both called Randall, were in charge. Sorley Boy himself retrieved a number of cannons from the wrecks, which he then put atop the castle. They tried to turn the castle into an appropriate house for a noble family, with a large estate, and thus built a range of domestic buildings within and without the castle bounds itself. As Catholics, the MacDonnells were involved in the 1641 rebellion and the subsequent civil war, which resulted in the MacDonnells having to leave Dunluce with the village burnt. In the 1620s, it was said that the village had 40 houses and other buildings here, such as a courthouse and jail, a smithy, a mill, a church, as well as a complex of gardens with terraces, raised beds and other similar features that was constructed near the castle and village. For those fans of Game of Thrones watching, you may recognise Dunluce as it was used to film many of the scenes on Pike, the Greyjoy Island stronghold.
Shortly after, the lands around Dunluce were divided among the Cromwellian planters, who then started to dismantle the castle to reuse the materials. This meant that by the time Charles II gave the Earl back his lands in the 1660s, the site was in more or less the same state as can be seen here today. After 2 months in the mountains recovering, Dqueller went down to the village at Dunluce, where he was told that the man in charge had gathered most of his men at arms and was with them as they accompanied the English in territories that the English were having difficulties in. With near all the Lord's men gone, it was easy for Dqueller to move about the village unhindered, and so became quite friendly with some of the local young women who lived there.
After a couple of days here, while Dqueller was visiting in a hut of some of the women he knew, 2 Englishmen came into the hut asking about Dqueller by name, although fortunately they did not know what he looked like. The 2 men, one of whom was a sergeant, asked Dqueller who he was, and he told them that he was a lowly soldier under Don Alonso and who'd washed ashore and had been captured by the English, but had been left behind due to his injuries.
The 2 English seemed satisfied by this explanation, telling him that he would have to accompany them to Dublin, but that they would find him a horse to carry him. After this, the 2 men began to pay more attention to the pretty young girls. Seeing an opportunity, the mother of the girls discreetly signalled to Dqueller to make a break out the front door, which he did, and he describes running and vaulting over the hedges until the castle was well out of sight, not stopping until dropping on the rushes that night, beside a large lake where he met some local young lads collecting their cattle.
Dqueller found food and shelter with these folk, who were also hiding from the English with their herds of cattle up in the mountainous regions nearby. After 2 days, one of the young boys went down to the village to obtain what news he could. The lad reported that the English, in a rage, were searching the village for Dqueller and asking all those who passed for information on him. Learning of this, the young lad returned to their huts in the highland to relay what he'd observed to his father and Dqueller. Unable to return to Dunluce village, Dqueller heard rumours of a holy man that Dqueller describes as several leagues away, banished to a castle by the English. It seems odd that Dqueller would use the term league as a unit of measurement, as Prince Philip II had abolished it 20 years previously. Dqueller calls the bishop Don Normando Termi meaning Bishop of Times, that he had tears in his eyes as he approached the bishop and kissed the bishop's ring. The bishop, being in the garb of a savage for concealment, had gathered 12 other Spanish to him at this stage. Treated with all kindness for 6 days before Mass was said at night, and then the 18 men were put to sea in the early morning, heading for Scotland, where it was said that King James VI would help them return home. Before leaving, having learnt of Dqueller's standing, the bishop talked to Dqueller about the assistance the Spanish crown might be able to give him in continuing his work here, and saying that he planned to visit the court of Philip II not long after they left. The boat was not a good one, and was nearly swamped as it lost its mainsail, forcing them to make land at Shetland, where they patched the boat while waiting for the weather to improve, allowing them to make for Scotland.
Things did not get any better for them when they arrived at the court of King James VI. Instead of kindly clothing and feeding them, as their status demanded, they were left without these basic needs and were thrown in the dungeon for 6 months.
James had planned on giving them to the English Queen, Elizabeth I, in order to buy favour with her, but some of the Catholic lords at his court convinced James that the better course of action would be to deliver the Spanish back to their lords and not encourage conflict between them. This decided, James hired a Scottish merchant out of Flanders to come and deliver the Spaniards he held back there. With 4 vessels and provisions needed, the merchant set sail after the king gave him 5 ducats for each Spaniard he brought to Flanders. They passed by the English ports and fleets without any hassle, but alas, the Dutch, who had been forewarned of their arrival, had been waiting for nearly 2 months just outside of Dunkirk at a well-known sandbar. When they spotted the 4 vessels trying to enter the port, the Dutch opened up with their cannons, forcing them into more sandbars where they became wrecked. Boats from the port tried to come out and help those being wrecked, but were driven back to port by shots from the Dutch cannon. Dqueller describes the vessel he was in, getting smashed and having to jump overboard, then clinging for dear life to a piece of timber that was floating near him, using it to help him get ashore in only his shirt. Having witnessed these scenes, Dqueller wrote,
"The Dutch, making 1,000 pieces of 270 Spaniards, who came in ships which brought us to Dunkirk, without leaving more than 3 alive, for which they are now being paid out, as more than 400 Dutchmen who have been taken since then have been beheaded. This I wish to write to you, from the city of Antwerp, 4th of October, 1589.
It is here that Dqueller got to write down his experiences, all entirely from memory, as had no opportunity to keep a record before this point. The core of the research and information that had been put into this series of 4 episodes came from Captain Francisco Dqueller's memoirs.
These memoirs are still considered one of the best first-hand accounts of Ireland in the late 16th century. This document, after having been written by Dqueller, was discovered in the archives of Academia del Historia in Madrid, where it lay in oblivion for about 3 centuries before the work of Captain Cicero Fernandez Duro, a Spanish officer, entitled Del Armada Invincible, which was published in Madrid 1885 and unearthed it for our benefit to this day.
Thank all of you who stuck with us as we followed Captain Francisco Dqueller in his adventures around Elizabethan Northwest Ireland, after being shipwrecked several times, leading to the fascinating tale made up of first-hand accounts of the keeps of lords to the huts of the poor folk, telling of great kindnesses he received, as well as the extreme horrors he witnessed and endured. This is a complex tale of great historical and archaeological importance, helping to understand the traditions of certain people and places brought about by the great events described in these pages. And we hope we've been able to do them justice. Thank you all for watching. Please don't forget to like, leave a comment, even a suggestion for a new series, as well as give a thumbs up. Here's hoping to be with you again soon. Slán go fóill.